Sawadee-ka. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we're studying the words of the Buddha. We're in volume 11, which is titled The Realms of Existence. We're in chapters 121 through 130. We're actually coming to a close in this book here in about another 2 weeks, where we've been studying this book for several months, going through volumes 2 through 13 of the entire book series, gradually doing that over a 1.5 year time frame. The way that we do this program is different than we do our other programs. Typically, I'm teaching in a more traditional method where I'm talking for maybe 15, 20, 30 minutes and opening up for questions, and teaching another 15, 20, 30 minutes and opening up for questions. The way we do this program is I invite students in Zoom to be able to read a chapter from the book. We're going to cover 10 chapters today, and the chapters are pretty small. In this case, this first one is only about 3 sentences actually. But a student in Zoom can volunteer to read the chapters. Then I'm going to share some teachings on that. Then I'm going to open up to any and all questions that you guys have related to that particular chapter. So if there's anyone in Zoom that would like to volunteer, you can electronically raise your hand and unmute your microphone, and you'll be able to volunteer to read the chapter. After I share some teachings on it, then I'm going to open up to questions where anybody who's in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, you can ask questions through putting that in the comment section. Or if you're in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand, unmute your microphone, and ask any and all questions that way. So it looks like Vibhav is volunteering to read first. So go ahead, sir.
Thank you, David. Nibbana, the destruction of the taints. Venerable Sir, it is said, the removal of craving, the removal of anger, the removal of ignorance and knowing of true reality. Of what now, Venerable Sir, is this a designation? This monk is a designation for the element of Nibbana, enlightenment. The removal of craving, the removal of anger, the removal of ignorance and knowing of true reality. The destruction of the taints is spoken of it in that way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. So this particular book has been walking through each of the 5 realms of existence and helping you understand the cycle of rebirth. And that's kind of where we left off last week with discourses from the Buddha explaining about the cycle of rebirth. Now the book goes into chapters helping you to understand how to get to enlightenment, because that's the escape out of the cycle of rebirth. The cycle of rebirth is never something that you should have fear about or worry about. Getting to enlightenment is the goal, and you'll be able to see that your mind is actually doing that because it's becoming more peaceful and more joyful as you're making your way to it. Because remember, the teachings of the Buddha aren't about believing a bunch of things and then hoping something good happens when you die. It's about training your mind now, doing this inner work, and now experiencing the ideal life in this life, getting to a point where the mind's completely peaceful and joyful. So the elimination of discontentedness is the ultimate goal. In having done so, by eliminating craving, anger, and ignorance, your mind not only will experience enlightenment, but you'll also know that you're no longer going to be reborn over and over and over again. And you'll be able to see this as occurring because your mind will be peaceful and joyful for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. You won't have even the slightest ickiness in your mind by the time you get to enlightenment. So this student is asking the Buddha, the removal of craving, anger, and ignorance, what does this mean? What is that going to do for us? Essentially, that's what's being said here. And the Buddha is saying, oh, this is how you get to enlightenment, right? That's what he's saying. That's the designation for the element of Nibbana or enlightenment. And he's saying the removal of craving, anger, and ignorance is what's going to essentially make sure the mind experiences enlightenment. It's the destruction of the taints or the pollutions or the defilements. Because what the Buddha did is he discovered these 10 individual pollutions in the mind, referred to as the 10 fetters, and it's when you uproot those that the mind is gradually moving closer and closer to enlightenment. And when they're completely eliminated, that's where you'll see that the mind is actually enlightened. But when we talk about these 10 fetters at a high level, we talk about them as craving, anger, and ignorance. So craving is that longing, yearning, the wanting, the expecting, chasing after the objects of your affection, the unquenchable thirst that the mind has. And if the mind gets what it wants, then it gets those pleasant feelings. Happiness, excitement, elation, thrill, exhilaration, euphoria. But if the mind's not getting what it wants, what it's longing, yearning for, then it's going to experience the painful feelings. The painful feelings can be things like sadness, anger, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, resentment, jealousy. All these and others are very painful to experience. So it's the mind's longing, yearning that's causing that. And when that anger is arising, the mind will firmly believe that it's coming from something external. The mind firmly believes that mom and dad are making me angry, or my brothers and sisters are annoying me, my coworkers, my boss are frustrating me, or whatever it is. So when that anger is arising, the mind becomes unskillful and it pushes people away, or it pushes the situation away. This is called aversion. Or you might be bitter, harsh, and hostile to people, or you might be putting your expectations on people and trying to control them. This is the mind trying to get its cravings fulfilled, because whatever it's experiencing with this person, it feels like if it pushes that person away, it won't experience that thing anymore, and now the mind will be peaceful. But you actually haven't solved the problem and the cause of the problem, because the real cause of the problem is the craving inside the mind. Just pushing this person away doesn't solve that. And then if you're bitter, harsh, and hostile to people, this is the mind almost trying to fear the other person to do things your way, or putting your expectations on people, trying to pressure them into doing things your way. This is the mind trying to get its cravings fulfilled. And where this is all coming from is that unknowing of true reality, or the misunderstanding, the confusion, the lack of wisdom in the mind. Oftentimes translated as ignorance, but remember, we're translating from the words of a Buddha to English, and an enlightened being, and surely a Buddha, wouldn't refer to people in a derogatory and degrading way. So the Buddha wouldn't have called someone ignorant. Instead, unknowing of true reality is a better way to think about it, or misperception, confusion, misunderstanding. Because of the mind's confusion, because of its lack of wisdom, it continues to crave and it continues to have anger. So while we call it craving, anger, and ignorance, it's really because of ignorance that craving and anger continues in the mind. So by removing these, and in more detail, the 10 fetters, that's what's going to produce enlightenment. So you would really need to know the 10 fetters in order to be able to get to enlightenment, but it does help you to understand what's called the 3 poisons, or the 3 unwholesome roots, or the 3 fires, because there's solutions at this level, and there's things to talk about here in terms of the generation of Gama, that it's through craving, anger, and ignorance that's going to produce unwholesome Gama. And it's when you uproot these that you're then practicing generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom, which are the wholesome roots, which now you'll produce wholesome Gama. In order to get to enlightenment, you're going to need to bring your practice up where you're practicing the Eightfold Path for an extended period of time, where you're not having any craving, anger, and ignorance. But of course, that's gradual training just to get to that point. But then you're going to need to maintain that for several years in order to extinguish all your unwholesome Gama coming back to you. And you're doing this through practicing the Eightfold Path and making decisions through generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom. So if you guys have been in any of the classes where I've taught the 3 poisons, or the 3 unwholesome roots, or the 3 fires, you know this content really well. And here is just an opportunity for you to see it through the words of the Buddha, how I've always shared that it's an elimination of craving, anger, and ignorance that produces enlightenment. And that's where you're going to gradually see more and more clarity in the mind, cheerfulness, gladness. The mind's going to be uplifted. One of the ways to think about this is you're attaining enlightenment, but another way to think about it is that the mind's already enlightened, and you just got to get these pollutions out of the way so you can experience it. And the way that you might think about this is if there was the sun and there was clouds in front of the sun, as you gradually peel away the clouds, the rays of the sun are going to start shining through, and you're going to be able to see that and experience that. And it's when you get the clouds completely out of the way that, the sun is completely bright and shining. Well, the mind, when you do this, there won't be any more clouds. In real life, the clouds are going to come back. But in the case of the mind and training the mind, once you get these clouds out, once you get the pollution out, it has no ability to come back ever again. But this analogy is really helpful because you can understand the qualities of the enlightened mind shining through and peering through, much like the rays of the sun kind of gradually peering through. So as you're gradually bringing down the craving, anger, and ignorance, this is where you can have periods of time for a couple of minutes, couple of hours, couple of days, what have you, even weeks eventually, and even months by the time you get to the 3rd stage of enlightenment, we are experiencing the qualities of enlightenment. And now, because the mind still has some pollution, as that arises, you're going to experience some discontentedness. But eventually, it's when you completely eliminate and remove craving, anger, and ignorance that then the mind is going to firmly be in the enlightened mental state. And that's where you'll see 1, 2, 3 years of complete peace and joy in the mind, not even the slightest ickiness. So let me know if you have questions on this. This is just a very short chapter. And if you've been studying with me in all the foundational classes, you've already heard me talk about these things in detail. But now you've got the words of the Buddha to be able to see this. So if you have questions, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So Vibhav, you have a question? Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I just had a question about craving and anger. I think we've discussed before that craving causes anger. I'm wondering if craving always causes anger, but like at some point, because you have craving,
yes,
you will always at some point become angry at some point.
Yeah, you can't experience anger without a craving. That's why when you look at the 10 fetters and you understand the 4 stages of enlightenment, how in that second stage of enlightenment, the sensual desire and ill will have been diminished and greatly thinned together. And then by the time you get to the 3rd stage of enlightenment, sensual desire and ill will is completely gone from the mind, because sensual desire is the main, when we talk about craving, desire, attachment, wants, and expectations, it's sensual desire. There's other cravings, desires, attachments besides that, but that's the main one. And that's where the ill will is arising, the anger is arising. So there has to be a craving in the mind in order for anger to arise.
I guess that I understand that part. I was wondering whether a craving will always arise anger. That's not true, right? Anger is caused by craving, that's understood, but a craving will always not arise anger in the end, or will that also will always happen.
Yeah, so when we talk about these, we talk about them typically in the extremes, right? Because craving, anger, and ignorance, but there's really a spectrum of cravings, right? So there's really strong, deeply held cravings, desires, attachments, like maybe with your wife or your daughter, your son, right? Really strong craving there. But then there's like little tiny, tiny cravings, like maybe you want to eat a bag of M&Ms, right? Now, if something happens where you're not getting what you want from a family member, that's where the really intense anger can arise. But maybe you go into 7-Eleven and they don't have your bag of M&Ms and you're just kind of slightly annoyed, but you let it go within 5 seconds, right? So there's craving is like a spectrum from very minor ones to very strongly held ones. So therefore, when we talk about this anger, we talk about it in the extreme, but the lighter versions of that is like a slight annoyance or even a dislike, right? That's coming from the same aspect of the mind that we refer to as anger, ill will, and we talk about it in the extreme, but it's really a spectrum there. And it's based on the level of craving that you have in your mind. So that bag of M&Ms that you go into 7-Eleven and they've run out a bag of M&Ms, now there's that slight little annoyance. And now that's still coming from that same area of anger. But that particular craving, because it's so light, it's not arising anger per se. It's just a little bit of annoyance.
Okay, so if I were to just repeat what you're saying, is basically anger is also a spectrum here. So anything like annoyance, irritation, frustration, fear, all those are kind of in the same spectrum as anger.
I wouldn't put
not fear, but
I wouldn't put fear in there, but yeah, all those other ones you mentioned, it's all in the same category. It's just that we're labeling it in the extreme so you understand what it is, but then there's shades of that. There's a spectrum there, and it's based on how deeply held cravings you have. And then also, when someone's first getting started, they also, when they're experiencing any particular bout of discontentedness, it's very rarely just one craving. There's usually like 2, 3, 4, 5 different cravings that are in the mind. So not only can you experience anger when you have one deeply held attachment, but when you have 3, 4, 5, maybe more stacked up and there's multiple cravings getting triggered, it can produce more intense emotion like anger. Whereas if it truly is just a small thing like a bag of M&Ms, the mind can experience a lot less of a feeling, but it's still coming from the same place. It's still the same mental object, but it's just to a lesser degree because the craving is to a lesser degree.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let me see if we have anything here on our social media. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere else. So let's go to the next one. Is there someone who would like to read this one, chapter 122? Okay, it looks like Vibhav.
The destruction of craving is nirvana, enlightenment. Venerable Sir, it is said, a being, in what way, Venerable Sir, is one called a being? One is stuck, rather, tightly stuck in desire, longing, excitement, and craving for form. Therefore, one is called a being. One is stuck, tightly stuck in desire, longing, excitement, and craving for feelings. Therefore, one is called a being. One is stuck, lightly stuck in the desire, longing, excitement, and craving for perceptions. Therefore, one is called a being. One is stuck, tightly stuck in desire, longing, excitement, and craving for volitional formations, choices, decisions. Therefore, one is called a being. One is stuck, tightly stuck in desire, longing, excitement, craving for consciousness. Therefore, one is called a being. Suppose, rather, some little boys or girls are playing with sandcastles. So long as they are not free of desire, longing, excitement, thirst, passion, and craving for those sandcastles, they cherish them, play with them, treasure them, and treat them possessively. But when those little boys or girls lose their desire, longing, excitement, thirst, passion, and craving for those sandcastles, then they scatter them with their hands and feet, demolish them, shatter them, and put them out of play. So too sand, rather, scatter form, demolish it, shatter it, put it out of play, practice for the destruction of the craving, scatter feeling, scatter perception, scatter volitional formations, choices, decisions, scatter consciousness, demolish it, shatter it, put it out of play, practice for the destruction of craving. For the destruction of craving, rather, is nirvana, enlightenment.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. So if you've been studying in this program, then you already know probably what the Buddha is talking about here. Back in volume 2, we were talking about the 5 aggregates, and we've talked about them at other times too. The way that you might think about these is the 5 criteria or the 5 elements that determine what is a living being, because you're going to need to know what is a living being. If you don't know how to tell what a living being is, you could be out there causing harm to a living being, and now harm keeps coming back to you. But by you understanding what is a living being and what isn't a living being, now you can base your decision-making in wisdom, where you understand that it's unwise to cause harm to a living being, because anytime you cause harm to a living being, harm is going to come back to you. It's important to understand that you can't cause somebody else discontentedness. Remember, just like nobody can cause you discontentedness, you're causing your own discontentedness. You can't cause anyone else discontentedness either, but you can cause them harm. Causing someone harm would be to cause harm to their material possessions, to their physical body, to their reputation, things like this. And if you cause harm to a living being, harm is going to come back to you. So you would like to know how to discern what is a living being and what isn't a living being. So these 5 aggregates or 5 elements or 5 criteria are going to help you to be able to do that. And this is a definition that's held up for 2,500 years, but you're not interested in believing it. You need to be able to learn it intellectually, reflect on it to independently verify it, and then practice to be able to see the truth for yourself. So as I go through and I explain these to you, you could actually be independently verifying this because you know you're a living being. So you have all 5 of these aggregates. So the first one is form. A living being is going to have physical form. You know you have a physical body, right? A living being is going to have feelings. These are the pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant. Then there's perceptions. These are your views and opinions about the world. Then volitional formations are your choices and decisions. So living beings going to have free will. Then there's the consciousness. The consciousness is the mind itself. Okay, so what the Buddha is saying here is that living beings are determined based on whether they have these 5 aggregates or these 5 criteria. Because a being has a certain object, has form, feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, and consciousness, they are considered to be a living being. And this is wisdom that you need to independently verify. And you can do that through looking at this being who you are. You can look at a squirrel. You can look at a rabbit, a bird, a snake. They have all 5 aggregates. But then you don't just stop there, right? Because you really would like to investigate and examine these teachings. Take something that you know isn't a living being, like maybe the electronic device that you're listening to this on or watching this on, right? Ask yourself, does it have physical form? Yeah, it has physical form. Does it have feelings? No, doesn't have those. Does it have perceptions, views, and opinions about the world? Nope, doesn't have those. Does it have volitional formations? Does it make choices and decisions? No, it can't do that because it can't turn itself on and off. It needs human intervention in order to be able to do anything. So it's the human that's making the choices and decisions, and the machine is just doing what the human has told it to do, right? So it's not making its own free will decisions. And then it doesn't have a consciousness. It doesn't have a mind. So you can independently verify this with a desk, a chair, a tree. You can see that all these things aren't living beings because they don't have 5 aggregates. So now when you start to understand what a living being is and what a living being isn't, now you can make wiser and wiser decisions through things like the 5 precepts about ensuring that you're not causing harm to living beings through practicing the 5 precepts. This is going to help you to reduce your craving, anger, and ignorance. Because if you went out into the world and you were actively and repeatedly killing, for example, or stealing, or having sexual misconduct, or lying, or taking substances that cause heedlessness, there's a certain amount of craving, anger, and ignorance there that's in the mind, right? That you're causing harm to these other beings. So once you understand that, then what the Buddha is saying is how beings are tightly stuck, right? That essentially he's talking about how they're holding on, they are desiring, longing, yearning, and taking excitement in these things. So for example, a human being can cling to this physical form. So now when you look in the mirror and you see a wrinkle, you see a pimple, you see a mole, a gray hair, or something like this, you're all shaken up by that because the mind is clinging to this physical body, wanting it to be permanent, right? Or say you experience illness or sickness, right? And now the mind is discontent because of that, because it's clinging to this physical form, wanting it to be permanently comfortable. Or say you experience hunger pain and now you're grumpy or irritable. That's not a biological thing. That's the mind craving permanent comfort of the body, the physical form, when this body is not going to be permanently comfortable. So the individual beings in the unenlightened state don't realize it, but they're clinging to this physical form. They're tightly stuck, and now they can't escape out of this discontentedness and out of the cycle of rebirth because the mind is stuck. And the same thing with feelings, that an individual can cling to feelings. Typically pleasant feelings, the mind is longing, yearning for those. And now when the mind's happy and excited about something, it will cling to that feeling and want it to be permanent, not realizing as long as it's craving and clinging and getting conditioned pleasant feelings that they're not going to be permanent. And people can even cling to painful feelings too. This is where like someone might hold a grudge towards somebody else. If you've ever experienced somebody doing something unwise and your mind got angry about that, the mind didn't know because of its ignorance or unknowing of true reality that it was your own mind that was causing that feeling. And now the mind might think, if I hold on to this grudge, this irritability, this resentment towards this other person, now I'm going to get back at them. But you're actually not getting back at them. You're just harming your own mind, because now holding on to that anger or resentment is just plaguing your own mind. It's kind of like holding on to a hot coal and trying to burn somebody else with it. The only person getting burned is yourself. So clinging to feelings is unwise. You're not interested in doing that. So beings are tightly stuck because they don't understand, with their lack of wisdom, of why this is hindering them and plaguing their mind by clinging to their feelings. Then there are certain perceptions. This is your views and opinions about the world. Some very strong perceptions that people oftentimes have are political ones, like views and opinions about politics. And now somebody might argue and yell and fight and scream in order to try to get everyone to agree with them on their political positions. But you can have other perceptions too. This is where sexism and racism and all these other things come from, because people are clinging to their perception. They think everybody with a certain gender, or everybody with a certain color of skin, or everybody with a certain sexual orientation is this way or that way. And now they cling to that perception, and now it leads to unwise decisions. That now they're making unwise decisions because, let's just say there's this really qualified person that shows up and they have a certain gender, certain ethnicity, certain sexual orientation, and someone's clinging to their perception, and now maybe they don't hire that person because of their perceptions. But that could have been the very best candidate that could actually have made their company so much more successful. But yet, because of clinging to their perceptions, they made an unwise decision, and now they didn't hire this person. Right? So there's perceptions of political perceptions. There can be perceptions about, like I mentioned, like certain genders or ethnicities or sexual orientations. You can have perceptions about any number of things and that the mind can cling to. And as soon as your mind's forming a perception, that means it doesn't know what is true reality. It's just something that the mind is assuming. That's what you can maybe think about a perception as an assumption. And if you're clinging to an assumption and now you're making decisions through that assumption, it's going to lead to unwholesome results because you're not making wise decisions based in truth. In order to be able to make 100% wise decisions, to be able to extinguish all your unwholesome karma and experience enlightenment, you need to make all your decisions based in truth, right? So if you're clinging to a perception, it may or may not even be the truth. And now when you're making a decision, you're going to make a decision, put that out into the world, and you just made a decision on something that is a falsehood. And now it's going to produce unwholesome results for you. So you've got to get really good at spotting your mind forming perceptions about certain things and not allowing it to do that. Then there's certain choices and decisions that you can cling to. Let's just say you were going to go to a trip to Australia and you're planning this 6 months in advance and you're so excited, right? Because that's what the Buddha's talking about here. You're so excited about this trip and you just can't wait to go on this trip. And you put down a deposit of $200 for this particular trip. And now there's been some time that's gone by and it's 5 months down the road. You're only 1 month before the trip. And now let's just say your financial situation has changed. And now maybe you got laid off at your work, or maybe you needed to have a certain expense that you weren't planning for. And now let's just say that financial amount that it's going to take for you to go to Australia is no longer feasible for you. But if you cling to this trip to Australia, you might make some unwise decisions, like potentially going into debt just to be able to go on this trip, where what a wise decision might be in that situation is to postpone the trip, is go next year or 2 years or 3 years from now. But if you're stuck and tightly stuck and you're longing, yearning, and you're desiring to go and you've got all this excitement, your mind won't feel comfortable letting that trip go. And now when you're holding on to that decision, it's going to motivate unwise decisions. So you're going to need to be able to understand that there's no harm in planning a future event or future situations or future experiences that you're going to have. But it's when you cling to it that now as things change along the way, if you don't update your decision, then that means you're going to make a decision based on old information. And now you may well be making an unwise decision, that as you now make that unwise decision, it's going to produce unwholesome results for you. So when you're making decisions, particularly things for the future, but even something 10 minutes from now, you can have some impermanence within a 10-minute time frame, right? Like maybe you're going to go out in your car, and now that was your plan to go out and get something to eat in your car. And within 2 to 3 minutes after making that decision, you get an alert on your phone that there's a tornado coming, through your neighborhood. Well, it would be unwise to go out in your car in that situation. So you never know when impermanence is going to come, and you need to ensure that you're not clinging to your decisions. Your choices and decisions need to be to the point where you can choose to change your decisions if there's any impermanence that is happening, because then you can ensure that you're always implementing a wise decision, factoring in all the new information that you've experienced over the next 5 minutes or over the next 5 months. And that way you'll ensure that you're experiencing only wholesome results and not generating any unwholesome results. Then there's the consciousness itself, the mind. The mind can cling to the self-identity, things like your culture, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, your nationality, your job or occupation. You can cling to any of this stuff as who you think you are as a person. And now if you cling to this, when you hear positive and agreeable things, you'll get pleasant feelings and excited about that. But then when you hear negative or degrading things, you'll experience painful feelings. So you need to get to the point where you're not stuck and holding on to anything about this identity of who you think you are, because it's just going to motivate unskillful conduct. Because in that restaurant 2 tables over, if someone's talking disparagingly about, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, your nationality, or what have you, you might be ready to fight, right? You can get so furious that you're ready to fight, right? So you would like to be able to not cling to any of those things, because eliminating your craving and clinging is what produces enlightenment. The Buddha said that in the previous discourse, but he's saying that down here too, that the destruction of craving is what produces enlightenment. But as long as you're clinging to these things, your mind still isn't enlightened, right? So oftentimes people can see the external cravings pretty easily, right? Like if you're attached to your mobile phone and you leave your mobile phone at home by accident and you go outside and you experience fear that's coming up in your mind, you know that you're attached to your mobile phone. You're craving for it to be permanent. Or if your mobile phone breaks and you're upset or angry, you know you're attached to your mobile phone. You can potentially see that. But these are things that are within this being that you're not necessarily paying attention to. So you need to pay attention to how the mind can actually cling to this physical form, to the feelings, to your own perceptions, to your choices and decisions that you're making, and then the identity within the mind as well, because these things aren't typically as obvious. And the Buddha gives this great little analogy here about the little boys and girls who are playing with sandcastles. That when they're first playing with them and they're very possessive of them, right? If you've ever played with sandcastles as a kid at the beach, well, when you're first making it and you're very possessive about it and you're trying to make the perfect sandcastle, if the waves come in and demolish the sandcastle, oh no, my sandcastle, you're really upset and frustrated because of this. But if you've played with the sandcastle for a while, you've set it up really nice and there hasn't been any waves that come to demolish it, and you've played with it for a while and you scatter it and you let go of it, well, then if the waves come in, it's no big deal. It's like, oh, I wasn't attached to that anyway. I wasn't possessive of the sandcastle anyway. I've already scattered all the sand. So now when the waves come in, no big deal, right? So what the Buddha is saying is just like a child would scatter the sand and no longer be attached to the sandcastle. So essentially when the water's coming in, you're unaffected by it. You would like to do the same thing with all of these particular all these aggregates, the five criteria, that you would like to scatter these, meaning eliminate any craving or clinging where the mind's holding on to it. So this is where you need to be able to understand the middle way, right? So let's just take one of these, like the physical form. If you were obsessive about this physical form, if you were like looking in the mirror, constantly, if you're applying, 50 different creams, if you're, obsessively trying to maintain this youthfulness in this certain amount of health, you're working out in the gym, maybe 8, 10, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. This is the mind chasing and longing, yearning, and clinging for this body to be permanent and keep this youthful appearance, right? That's not going to produce peace and joy because the mind's going to be longing and yearning. And as soon as you cling to this body, wanting it to be permanent, it's not permanent. So when it changes, your mind's going to be discontent. But if you were on the other side of this, where you could care less about this body and you just put any old food into it and you didn't even pay attention to any kind of exercise or anything like that, that's not going to produce peace and joy either. So while you're not clinging to this body, to this physical form, you need to come to the middle where you're making wise decisions to perhaps eat healthy food, perhaps go to a medical checkup from time to time, do some exercise and things like this, that you're going to need to pay attention to those kinds of things. And you can do that without longing, yearning, and without becoming discontent when you notice that the body is unhealthy, because you understand that this body is not going to be permanently healthy. It's not possible. So you would like to take each one of these and practice the middle way where you're not craving and clinging, but you're making wise decisions about these things. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this, because the Buddha is just bringing to your attention that you can be craving and clinging to these aggregates. And in order to get to enlightenment, you need to eliminate all craving and clinging, not just about the external things, but the thing that comprises this being as well. So you can put your questions into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I don't see any questions. So let's move to the next one, which is chapter 123. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, Mr. Chris, go ahead, sir.
Directly visible Nibbana. Master Gotama, it is said, directly visible Nibbana, directly visible Nibbana. In what way is Nibbana directly visible, immediate, inviting one to come and see, applicable, to be personally experienced by the wise? Brahman, one is excited by craving, overcome by craving, with mind obsessed by it, intends for his own harm, for the harm of others, or for the harm of both. And he experiences mental discontentedness and sadness. But when craving is abandoned, he does not intend for his own harm, for the harm of others, for the harm of both, and he does not experience mental discontentedness and sadness. It is in this way, too, that Nibbana is directly visible. One full of anger, overcome by anger, with mind obsessed by it, intends for his own harm, for the harm of others, and for the harm of both. And when he experiences mental discontentedness and sadness. But when anger is abandoned, he does not intend for his own harm, for the harm of others, for the harm of both, and he does not experience mental discontentedness and sadness. It is in this way, too, that Nibbana is directly visible. One who is unwise, overcome by ignorance, with mind obsessed by it, intends for his own harm, for the harm of others, or for the harm of both, and he experiences mental discontentedness and sadness. But when ignorance is abandoned, he does not intend for his own harm, for the harm of others, or for the harm of both, and he does not experience mental discontentedness and sadness. It is in this way, too, that Nibbana is directly visible. When Brahman, one experiences the remainderless destruction of craving, the remainderless destruction of anger, and the remainderless destruction of ignorance. It is in this way, too, that Nibbana is directly visible, immediate, inviting one to come and see, applicable, to be personally experienced by the wise.
Okay, thank you, sir. So this is another way of teaching the craving, anger, and ignorance. The elimination of this is what's going to lead to enlightenment. So that first discourse that we studied is just kind of a short little snippet, but this is a bit more detail, where the Buddha is talking about the unenlightened mind is going to excite and be overcome, and the mind's obsessed with this craving. And then the mind's going to have this intention of harm for one's own harm, others' harm, or the harm of both. Causing harm to yourself is like putting drugs and intoxicants into the body. This is going to cause harm to this being. Or there's other things that one could do. Causing harm to others, right? You could cause harm to their material possessions or their physical body or their reputation. This is the mind in being interested in causing harm to others or causing harm to both. And as long as there's craving, anger, and ignorance in the mind, it's not enlightened. It's going to keep experiencing discontentedness. And the Buddha calls out sadness here as well. So it's the elimination of craving, anger, and ignorance is going to do that. So you need to know this higher level understanding of what these three things are and the solutions here, but then in more detail, the 10 fetters. That's what's going to completely purify the mind. So you would need to really get into that detail, which is something that I teach in the various courses and programs, helping you to understand the 10 fetters in detail, using the words of the Buddha, because it's so important to study with his original words, because without them, you wouldn't even be able to get to the first stage of enlightenment. So whenever you're learning and growing and developing, you would like to have reliable translations from the teachings of the Buddha to be able to guide your practice and develop your wisdom. So let me know what questions you guys have here. We've already talked about craving, anger, and ignorance, so I don't know that we need to discuss it again, but if you have any specific questions or anything related to this discourse, just let me know. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. So now we'll go to the next one, which is 124. Would somebody like to read this? Okay, looks like Vibhav. Go ahead.
Directly visible Nibbana spoken by the perfectly enlightened one, shared by Venerable Ananda. His said friend, directly visible Nibbana, enlightenment, directly visible Nibbana. In what way has a perfectly enlightened one spoken of directly visible Nibbana? Here, friend, distant from sense desires, distant from unwholesome mental states, enters and resides in the first jhana, which is the thinking and pondering, based in seclusion, filled with excitement and joy. To this extent, too, the perfectly enlightened one has spoken of directly visible Nibbana, enlightenment, in a provisional, temporary sense. In reference to the second jhana, the third jhana, the fourth jhana, the base of the infinite of space, the base of infinite of consciousness, the base of nothingness, the base of neither perception or non-perception, identical aspects correlating to the first jhana were spoken. Also, the state of directly visible nibbana is provisionally temporarily revealed. The elimination of perception and feeling, as is the destruction of the taints, is non-provisionally permanent, explained to be directly visible nibbana, as in the following passages. Again, friend, by completely overcoming the base of neither perception nor non-perception, a monk enters and decides in the elimination of perception and feeling. And having seen with wisdom, his taints, fetters are completely destroyed. To this extent, friends, the perfectly enlightened one has spoken of directly visible nibbana in a non-provisional, permanent sense. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. So this is a discourse that was spoken by Ananda to basically help people to remember what it is that the Buddha taught. So here, what the Buddha was teaching was getting into these jhanas, the preliminary phases that the mind experiences, enhanced qualities of mind as it's on its way to the first stage of enlightenment. This is like the light bulb flickering, where you start seeing some of the qualities of enlightenment shining through. I've shared this, and I talk about the jhanas as this light bulb flickering, right? It's like getting glimmers. It's like the rays of the sun shining through the clouds, like I was talking about earlier in the class. So that's what the Buddha is talking about here is provisional, right? That we could almost call it temporary enlightenment, although there's no such thing as temporary enlightenment. But you do experience these qualities for a few minutes, a few days, a few hours, few weeks, even by the time you get to the third stage of enlightenment, even for a few months, your mind can be completely peaceful and joyful. And this is why it's important to never convince yourself that you're enlightened. And when you're experiencing those heightened qualities of mind, to not cling to them, because they're not permanent until they're permanent, because that's what the Buddha is talking about down here. I've always described enlightenment to you guys as permanent, and you can see it here, that's what the Buddha is talking about here as well. Because once the mind is completely purified, there's no more causes and conditions that are producing discontentedness. The mind's going to be permanently in that mental state. But all the way up until then, the mind can still experience discontentedness because there's still pollution in the mind. It's when you've completely destroyed the taints or the fetters that an individual is then going to experience the permanent mental state. And it's not a sudden thing, right? You're not going to be able to know the exact day or the exact minute that you've actually attained enlightenment. It's not that way, because you'll go 3 months, 4 months, 6 months without any discontentedness. Then you're going to experience just a little bit of discontentedness, a little bit of ickiness. And then you're going to go another 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, and you'll experience a little bit of discontentedness. And you'll go, and eventually you'll get to the point where it's like, it's been 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. There's no discontentedness. You would have to remember all the way back to when was that exact last moment where you experienced that little tiny bit of ickiness in your mind, that when you got rid of that, when was that? That's when you'd have to know. And you're not going to be tracking it like that. And if you are, the mind's probably obsessed and craving, and you're not going to actually get to enlightenment that way, right? So you're not going to know the exact moment you get to enlightenment. It's not sudden like that. It's gradual. And that's what the Buddha is talking about here. He says it very clearly in some of his other discourses, where it's gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress that leads to enlightenment. But now he's kind of talking about it in terms of the attainments, that as the mind is moving through these attainments gradually, you start seeing some of the qualities of enlightenment shining through, until eventually the taints are 100% destroyed, eliminated from the mind and eradicated, that the mind will then be in the permanent mental state of enlightenment. So let me know what questions you guys have here. This is helping you to be able to see what we've been talking about in all the different classes and courses about the flickering of the qualities of enlightenment, and then ultimately the mind is permanently enlightened. Looks like Vibhav has a question. Go ahead, sir.
So one question is about the wording here. Should this be like in infinity of space, or infinite? It says infinite of space. I think in other places it says infinity of space in this, in reference to the second jhana.
Right here?
Yeah.
Yeah. It looks like I need to read that after class. It might need to be updated.
Okay. And the other thing was this last portion, the second last paragraph. It says, again, friend, by completely overcoming the base of neither perception nor non-perception, a monk enters and decides the elimination of perception, feeling, and having seen his wisdom, his taints are completely destroyed. So it seems to be saying here, the question is, I guess, is like if you get to this attainment of neither perception or non-perception, This seems to be referring to as the same as fourth stage of enlightenment. I thought that was a separate attainment.
It is
not related to the stages of enlightenment. So I was still wondering how getting to neither perception nor perception will lead to the complete destruction of things.
Yeah, it is. All these attainments are separate. There's 4 jhanas, and then there's 4 other attainments that happen somewhere in the jhanas, but they can also happen in the stages of enlightenment too. So it's not that because you're experiencing this attainment that the mind is then enlightened. It's just that the Buddha is explaining that this is what one's experiencing on the way to enlightenment. So it's not like, okay, you've got this attainment, so now instantly the mind is enlightened at that point. It's not like that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Let me see. We don't have any other questions anywhere else. Okay, so now we'll go to the next chapter, 125. Would someone like to read this one? Okay, it looks like Keely. Go ahead, ma'am.
Nibbana in this very life, enlightenment, there are householder forms recognizable by the eye that are desirable, lovely, agreeable, pleasing, sensually enticing, tempting. If a monk does not seek excitement in them, does not welcome them, and does not remain holding to them, his consciousness does not become dependent upon them or cling to them. A monk without clinging attains Nibbana, enlightenment. There are householders, sounds recognizable by the ear, odors recognizable by the nose, flavors recognizable by the tongue, physical objects recognizable by the body, mental objects recognizable by the mind that are desirable, lovely, agreeable, pleasing, sensually enticing, tempting. If the monk does not seek excitement in them, does not welcome them, and does not remain holding to them, his consciousness does not become dependent upon them or cling to them. A monk without clinging attains Nibbana, enlightenment. This is the cause and reason, householder, why some beings here attain Nibbana in this very life. Monk, if through fading away of strong feelings towards the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind, through its fading away and elimination, one is liberated by non-clinging. One can be called a monk who has attained Nibbana, enlightenment in this very life. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Keely. So here, what the Buddha is talking about is the elimination of sensual desire. Whenever you see him talking about the 6 sense bases, where here he's talking about forms that are seen by the eye, right? Sounds recognizable by the ear, odors by the nose, flavors by the tongue, physical objects touching the body, and then mental objects in the mind. This is the 6 sense bases. And what he's talking about is the elimination of the sensual desire, where the mind's longing, yearning, and it doesn't seek excitement. It doesn't welcome and remain holding on to these things, where what the mind will do is it'll long and yearn through these sense bases. And without clinging, where the mind's longing, yearning through these sense bases, the mind will then experience enlightenment. But this is a great discourse for you, Vibhav, to be able to compare it to the last one, where the Buddha is not saying like as soon as you eliminate the sensual desire, then the mind will be enlightened. What he's saying is that someone who is enlightened will have eliminated sensual desire. So the same thing like the last one, that someone who is enlightened will experience these particular attainments. But some of those attainments, not everybody's going to experience on the way to enlightenment. The jhanas, yes, but not necessarily all those others. So he does this where he basically says, okay, someone who's gotten to enlightenment will be experiencing these kinds of things. But it's not to say that as soon as one does this, that then they will experience enlightenment. It's just saying that someone who is enlightened will no longer have clinging or longing, yearning through the 6 sense bases. So this is talking about the elimination of sensual desire, that you need to ensure that you're not longing, yearning, and welcoming all of this excitement, these conditioned pleasant feelings. Because if you allow your mind to get conditioned pleasant feelings about any particular contact through the 6 sense bases, Well, when you're not experiencing that contact anymore, your mind's going to swing from the excitement to the painful feelings like anger, sadness, frustration, and others. So you need to be able to be willing to let go of the temporary pleasant feelings in order to get to the permanent joy, the permanent peacefulness. You'll never get to that as long as you hold on to the temporary happiness. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. Okay, looks like Vibhav has a question. Go ahead.
So can you please go back to the previous chapter? I'm still kind of stuck on the wordings there.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess they're saying two parts here. One part is that they think there's a temporary, like the provisionally, when state of directly visible nirvana is provisionally relieved in the jhanas. And it's saying that either also here, the base of neither perception or non-perception is a temporary, where nibbana is provisionally or temporarily relieved. And then the next part, let's go down here. But here, I guess it's saying that when you overcome the base of neither perception or non-perception. So I guess what is the difference between what is written here in references to these jhanas and the attainments? The state of visible nirvana is temporary. And then in this case, with the overcoming of the base of neither perception or non-perception, it is permanent.
What's,
like I said, wordings are not clear to me.
Yeah, what's producing the permanent mental state of enlightenment is this. It's not the attainment. It's not the attainment of the neither perception nor non-perception. That's just something that he's talking about in line with all these other attainments, that these are the attainments are where the mind's getting the flickering of the temporary qualities of what enlightenment is like. You'll experience some flickering of that throughout all those attainments. But it's not until you have seen with wisdom and completely eliminated the fetters that once they're completely destroyed, that's where the mind then experiences enlightenment.
He's also saying that once you attain this neither perception nor non-perception attainment, you will enter and reside in the elimination of perception and feeling. So at this point, then when you see this wisdom of perception, like you eliminate perception and feeling, and then having seen this wisdom, your fetters will be completely destroyed. I think that's what's throwing me out the way is worded here. It seems to be so that once you have attained this attainment, you will enter into and reside in elimination of perception and feeling. And at that point, you will have seen this wisdom.
The way that I suggest you look at this is this part right here is separate from this part here. That's going to help you to be able to understand it. That this is an experience that one is having as an attainment. And now this is something that one, having had wisdom, one will then eradicate and destroy the fetters. But these are two separate things. That's why that's why there's an and between them. They're two separate things.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, any questions on 125? Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. So now we'll go to chapter 126. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Okay. Got a bunch of hands. All right, we'll just go with Keely, and it looks like Chris after that.
Thank you. The spoken elimination. Honorable Sir, it is said elimination. Through the elimination of what things is elimination spoken of. Form, Ananda, is impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen, subject to destruction, to vanishing, to fading away, to elimination. Through its elimination, elimination is spoken of. Feeling is impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen, subject to destruction, to vanishing, to fading away, to elimination. Through its elimination, elimination is spoken of. Perception is impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen, subject to destruction, to vanishing, to fading away, to elimination. Through its elimination, elimination is spoken of. Volitional formations, choices, decisions are impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen, subject to destruction, to vanishing, to fading away, to elimination. Through its elimination, elimination is spoken of. Consciousness is impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen, subject to destruction, to vanishing, to fading away, to elimination. Through its elimination, elimination is spoken of. It is through the elimination of these things, Ananda, that elimination is spoken of. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Keely. So here, once again, just another way of the Buddha helping you to be able to understand, to eliminate clinging to the 5 aggregates or the 5 criteria. He's going into a little bit way of talking about this differently than he did before, where he's just helping you to make sure you understand that form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness, they're all impermanent. So as soon as the mind's clinging to it, it wants it to be permanent, but you need to be able to understand that it's impermanent. So this physical body, if the mind's clinging to it, wanting it to be permanent, you just need to recognize that it's impermanent. It's conditioned, meaning if something's conditioned, that means it arises, it changes, and it fades away. That's what it means by dependently arisen. There's some dependency that caused this body and mind to arise, that it didn't just poof out of thin air, that there was some decision, there was some cause and effect that led to the arising of this body, that there's a rising and there's a changing and then there's a fading away. That's what he's talking about here, subject to destruction and vanishing and fading away. And that eventually this physical form is going to be eliminated, right? So this can help you to be able to deeply soak this into the mind so that when you see your mind clinging, say, to some perception, for example, this is a common one that people have arguments about with like political opinions and views and stuff like that. You need to just realize this is impermanent, right? That your perceptions are going to change, your views about politics are going to change, that everyone's going to agree with your views and opinions, and that's okay. The world's full of impermanence, and you don't need to go out into the world and convince other people that your thoughts about politics are true or accurate or right and everybody else is wrong. You can just understand these things are all impermanent, and there's never going to be a time where everyone agrees with you on anything whatsoever. So here is just another way of going into detail about helping you to gain the wisdom that you need to eliminate any kind of clinging to the 5 aggregates. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. Okay, I don't see any questions here. So now let's go to chapter 127. And Chris, you were volunteering to read. Would you like to read this one too?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
The elimination of the 5 aggregates is the elimination of discontentedness. Monks, the elimination, subsiding, and passing away of form, of feeling, of perception, of volitional formations, of consciousness, is the elimination of discontentedness, the subsiding of disease, the passing away of aging and death. Monks, when a monk is practicing in accordance with the teachings, this is what accords with the teachings. He should reside engrossed in fading away of strong feelings toward form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. One who resides engrossed in fading away of strong feelings towards form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness fully understands form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. One who fully understands form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness is freed from form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. He is freed from birth, aging, and death, freed from sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair, freed from discontentedness, I'd say. Monks, When a monk is practicing in accordance with the teachings, this is what accords with the teachings. He should reside reflecting on impermanence in form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. One who resides in reflecting on impermanence in form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness fully understands form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. One who understands form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness is freed from form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. He is freed from birth, aging, and death, freed from sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair, freed from discontentedness, I say. Monks. When a monk is practicing in accordance with the teachings, this is what accords with the teachings. He should reside reflecting on discontentedness in form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. One who resides reflecting on discontentedness in form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness fully understands form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. One who fully understands form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness is freed from form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. He is freed from birth, aging, and death, freed from sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair, freed from discontentedness, I say. Monks. When a monk is practicing in accordance with the teachings, this is what accords with the teachings. He should reside reflecting on non-self in form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. When one resides reflecting on non-self in form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness, one fully understands form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. One who fully understands form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness is freed from form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. He is freed from birth, aging, and death, freed from sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair, freed from discontentedness, I say.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So again, the Buddha is helping you to understand eliminating clinging to the five aggregates. And you need to understand them in order to be able to eliminate the clinging. And understanding the five aggregates is, yes, to understand what each one is, but to understand that they're impermanent. That's what the Buddha is saying, is once you understand that they're impermanent, you become wise to why it's so unwise to cling to them. Like, why would you ever cling to something and want it to be permanent when you know that it's actually impermanent? So that's why the Buddha is encouraging you here to reflect on the impermanent nature of all of these five aggregates, because that's what's going to help you to overcome the mind's desire to cling to these things and want them to be permanent. And by freeing the mind of clinging to any of these kinds of things, then the mind can actually experience enlightenment. So let me know what questions you guys have here. Just once again, a much more detailed discourse to help understand the elimination of clinging to the five aggregates, because you have all of these and the mind isn't necessarily so wise to it clinging to these things, because it tends to look at external things that it's clinging to rather than these kind of internal things. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. So now we'll go to the next one, which is chapter 128. Would someone like to read this? Okay, Vibhav, go ahead, sir.
The elimination of the six sense bases is the elimination of discontentedness. Monks, the elimination, subsiding and passing away of the eye, of the ear, of the nose, of the tongue, of the body, of the mind is the elimination of discontentedness. The subsiding of sickness, the passing away of aging and death. Monks, the elimination, subsiding and passing away of forms, of sounds, of odors, of flavors, of physical objects, of mental objects is the elimination of discontentedness. The subsiding of sickness, the passing away of aging and death.
Okay, so here the Buddha is teaching you to eliminate any longing, yearning through the six sense bases. Because whenever you see him talking about the six sense bases, then he's helping you to be able to understand how to eliminate central desire. So these first 6 here are what we refer to as the internal sense base: the eye, ear, nose, tongue, the body, and then the mind itself. That the mind is going to be longing, yearning through this doorways. And what the mind's longing, yearning, and looking to cling to are what we refer to as the external sense bases. Forms, that's what the eye is seeing, that the mind is longing, yearning through the eye to look at certain forms. Like maybe, wow, look at that brand new car. Look at that house. Oh, I want to get that so badly. Oh, look at that beautiful woman. Look at that handsome man. Oh, I want one of those, right? The mind's longing, yearning through the eyes for some physical form. Then there are sounds that the mind is longing, yearning through the ears in order to grab onto some sound. Maybe it's music, or maybe there's some certain voice, or maybe people being polite and respectful, certain sounds, or maybe even just silence, right? Like sitting in your home and not hearing any silence, or not hearing any sounds. And now you hear this jackhammer outside in your house, and now all of a sudden that's disagreeable to the mind, and that's where the painful feelings come in. So this is happening for each one of these sense bases. So getting to the elimination of discontentedness is getting to the elimination of longing, yearning through these 6 sense bases, and getting to the point where the mind has eliminated discontentedness, is enlightened. That's where there's now the subsiding of sickness, aging, and death, right? This is the cycle of rebirth. That's why this discourse is here in this particular book, because if you eliminate the causes and conditions that are producing discontentedness, you eliminate the sickness, aging, and death. You will still experience sickness in this life as an enlightened being. But what the Buddha is talking about here is that you won't experience this in any future life. So in this particular life, if you get to enlightenment, you will still experience sickness, aging, death, loss, and destruction, because this is impermanence. But there's not going to be any rebirth in a future life in order to experience these things again in a future life. And by the time you get to enlightenment, when you're experiencing sickness, aging, death, loss, and destruction, your mind's going to be completely peaceful. Where in the unenlightened state, experiencing these things is very painful for the mind. But by the time you get to enlightenment, you won't be experiencing those painful feelings anymore. You'll just know, like, this body's impermanent. Of course it's sick. What can I do to make it healthy? Let me get some medicine. Let me go to the doctor. Let me eat some fruit. Let me have some good juice. Let me have whatever it is. I need some rest, need some sleep. You'll just make those wise decisions to get the body back to health, right? And then when you see that the body's slowly deteriorating, you understand that's normal. That's the body aging. And as you get close to death as an enlightened being, you won't have any pain there. You won't have any fear of this death that's coming, because you just understand that that's part of the whole equation here, that because of birth, there's going to be sickness, aging, and death. It's going to happen. And now as an enlightened being, you completely understand that. You fully eradicated any clinging to these things, wanting them to be permanent. So now you don't have any fear or painful feelings associated with your own death or even the death of people around you. So let me know what questions you guys have here in this particular chapter. Okay, I don't see any questions. So now we'll go to the next one, 129. Would somebody like to read this? Okay, Keely, go ahead, ma'am.
Craving abandoned, no more subject to future arising. Rather, whatever desire there is for form, whatever lust, excitement, craving, abandon it. Thus that form will be abandoned, cut off at the root, make like a palm stem, obliterated so that it is no more subject to future arising. Radha, whatever desire there is for feeling, perception, volitional formations, choices, decisions, and consciousness, whatever lust, excitement, craving, abandon it. Thus that feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness will be abandoned, cut off at the root, make like a palm stem, obliterated so that it is no more subject to future arising. Rather, whatever desire there is for form, whatever lust, excitement, craving, whatever engagement and clinging, mental standpoints, adherence, and underlying tendencies, abandon them. Thus that form will be abandoned, cut off at the root, make like a palm stump, obliterated so that it is no more subject to future arising. Radha, whatever desire there is for feeling, perception, volitional formation, and consciousness, whatever lust, excitement, craving, whatever engagement and clinging, mental standpoints, adherences, and underlying tendencies, abandon them. Thus that feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness will be abandoned, cut off at the root, make like a palm stump, obliterated so that it is no more subject to future arising. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Keely. So again, another discourse talking about the elimination of craving and clinging for the five aggregates, because as long as the mind's craving or clinging to those, the mind can't experience enlightenment. You're getting a little bit more detailed language here where the Buddha goes in and talks about clinging to mental standpoints, adherences, underlying tendencies. This is what the mind needs to abandon, all this stuff, right? Where you might still have certain views and opinions, but you're not clinging to them. You have an open mind, right? You're no longer, you still have a mobile phone, but you're not clinging to it. You still have a home or a car, but you're not longing, yearning for it to be permanent. So when the Buddha is talking about abandoning all these things, he's not saying that you do without them, right? You still have these things, but your mind isn't clinging to these kinds of things. You're not holding on to them tightly. You're not stuck anymore. That you understand that this phone you've got is not permanent, right? And this language that he uses where he talks about obliterating it, making it like a palm stump and cutting it off at the root, so it's no longer subject to future arising. Because what can happen is some of these cravings, they can actually go dormant for a period of time, and then they can arise. I've even seen this happen in some people multiple years later, that someone appears to have eliminated a certain craving or clinging. It can be several months, even a year or two later, that craving can arise because of the contact that they're having in that situation. So you would like to get to the point where even though you might think that a certain craving or clinging has been eliminated, that you never really convince yourself of that 100% so that you stay vigilant, right? Because you can kind of have dust collect in the corners. You can go through a certain experience, think that your mind's fairly liberated. You might even be experiencing 2-3 months of peacefulness and joy. But then depending on the contact and the experience that you're having, there could be some residual clinging or some residual cravings that are in the mind that can arise. So you need to be sure that you never convince yourself that you've really ever attained anything, whether it's the jhanas, whether it's the stages of enlightenment. Of course, using that as a guide to help guide you as your personal growth and development, but just don't convince the mind that, say, personal existence view is gone or central desire is gone, so that way you can just stay vigilant and determined and dedicated, so that if at any point you see something arising, you can cut it out. One of the ways that I think about this, if you guys remember that game Whack-A-Mole, where the moles pop up and you have that mallet and you kind of have to hit them and knock them down. Well, if you think the game's over, you're going to have the mallet off to your side and you're going to be holding it down by your legs. And now when the mole comes up, you're not going to be able to whack it, right? But if you stand there vigilant with the mole or with the mallet the whole time, anytime the mole comes up, you can pop it, pop it, pop it, pop it. And that's what you'd like to be able to do with your own mind, is anytime you see any craving or clinging in any regards, that you can now cut it off and cut it off and cut it off. Because some of these cravings, they can actually go dormant for several months and years, and they can re-arise because the mind hasn't been fully purified yet. So this is helping you to be able to do that, is keep this language in mind that the Buddha says, abandon it, cut off at the root, make like a palm stump, obliterate it so that it's no longer subject to future arising. And by keeping that in mind, then you can stay vigilant and dedicated to do that. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. So now we'll go to the last one for today, chapter 130. Would somebody like to read this? Okay, looks like Chris. Go ahead, sir.
Elimination of craving, called the laying down of the burden. And what, monks, is the laying down of the burden? It is the remainderless fading away and elimination of that same craving, the giving up and letting go of it, freedom from it, non-reliance on it. That is called the laying down of the burden. This is what the perfectly enlightened one said. Having said this, the fortunate one, the teacher, further said this: the five aggregates are truly burdens. The burden carrier is the person. Taking up the burden of discontentedness in the world, laying the burden down is joyful. Having laid the heavy burden down without taking up another burden, having taken out craving from its root, one is freed from hunger, fully extinguished.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So carrying around craving, desire, attachment, the wants and expectations, that's the burden, right? Because when you're carrying that around, it can be really heavy on the shoulders because the mind is longing, yearning. And if you go outside in a particular day and all your cravings and wants and longing, yearnings getting fulfilled, you'll think it's the best day ever. But when you go out into the world with all that craving and longing, yearning, and you're not getting your way and things aren't going your way, you'll think it's such a hectic day. It's such a horrible day, right? That's why an individual in the unenlightened state, they go up and down because they're carrying around this burden. It's almost like a monster. And you're constantly feeding this monster of craving. But laying this burden down is to eliminate the mind's longing, yearning, and the craving. And this is where you get freedom from it, where you don't have to keep feeding this monster. So laying down this burden is what you're doing in the process of getting to enlightenment, is laying down the craving, desire, attachment. And part of what the Buddha is talking about here that he gets to in this next piece is laying down the burden of carrying around these five aggregates, right? Because if you think about all the time that we spend to brush our teeth, to comb our hair, to clean our nose, to clean our butt, to wash the body, to feed the body, to go to medical appointments, these are things that we need to do. And, we take joy in doing these things, and we can look at them very joyfully, particularly when the mind's enlightened. But it's a real burden in the unenlightened state to care for all of these five aggregates, to take care of all these five aggregates. It's a real burden. So what the Buddha is talking about is laying down the burden of craving, desire, attachment. And because we've been studying the five aggregates, he ultimately talks about laying down the five aggregates, that they are an actual burden to carry this body around. Because there's the physical body and then there's the mind, and the mind has to constantly carry this around, right? You have to cut your hair, you have to clean your ears, you have to, put on deodorant, you need to do all these different things. And the person who's carrying all of this, that's the burden carrier, the individual, right? And now taking up the burden, meaning experiencing rebirth in the world, that means you're going to experience discontentedness if you take up this burden. If you hold on to this burden and you continue to crave and cling, you're going to experience discontentedness in the world. But laying down the burden, laying down the craving and clinging, that's where you'll experience joy. There's sometimes going to be cravings that you can actually notice the exact moment that it leaves the mind, and you'll see the mind immediately becomes joyful. It immediately becomes uplifted, right? You can have some cravings that are like that. Then, having laid down the heavy burden of carrying around these five aggregates, and without taking up another burden, right? Because the mind's enlightened, there's not going to be rebirth. Having taken out craving from its root, which is inside the mind, that you've gotten rid of this monster that you're feeding, one is free from hunger. You're no longer hungry and chasing that unquenchable thirst of craving, desire, attachment. The mind is fully extinguished its craving, desire, attachments, and that's where it can be cool, calm, collected, cheerful, bright, glad, and uplifted, because the mind's not having to carry around this burden of its cravings, desires, attachments any longer. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. This is chapter 130. I'll see if there's any questions in Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. So I'm going to end class here like I typically do by just thanking all of you guys for joining. I appreciate your interest to learn and practice the teachings. Vibhav, that one chapter that you were having challenges with, I thought of a way to explain it to you that's going to help you. If you'd like to stick around, I'll help you with that. If there's anyone else that was having challenges with that, you're welcome to stick around too. I think this little simple way of explaining it will really help you guys. So next week, we're going to be in the next 10 chapters, which is chapter 131 through 140. So if you'd like to study those ahead of time, you're more than welcome to. And that way you can study the words of the Buddha. You can do any reference checks if you'd like to do that, and then look at the words that I'm sharing to help you as well. Tomorrow in our group learning program, I'm going to be sharing chapter 10 from our book, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment. This chapter is titled, What is Merit? This is a particular unique type of wholesome karma to generate. So I'm going to explain to you what that is, because you would need to know what that is and produce it in order to be able to make your way to enlightenment. So I'm going to be teaching that at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. Tomorrow, I'm also going to start teaching at the main temple hall here in Chiang Mai. I typically teach in a classroom, but I'm going to start teaching in the main temple hall at 6:30 p.m. tomorrow. I'm going to lead students in a meditation. And ultimately, we're going to start making that a regular thing where every single Sunday, I'm going to be doing a guided meditation and teaching in the main temple hall. And eventually, that's probably going to become me teaching the group learning program at 9 p.m. from the main temple hall. Because at that particular time frame, there's a night walking market where lots of people are in that area. So it's a great way to invite people to come in and learn and grow and develop with the teachings. So you'll see me eventually live streaming that, where I'll be teaching meditation and then ultimately at some point teaching the group learning program from there. I just need to purchase some more equipment to kind of make all of that happen and build up the funds to be able to support being able to do that. So thank you all for your support. Thank you for everything you're doing to learn and grow and develop on the path. Thank you for helping me to be able to share these teachings with you and countless other people. Perhaps I'll see you guys in one of these future classes. Be well and take care. Sawadee ka.
Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.